This passage comes near the beginning of the concluding scene of The Tempest by Thomas Ades, based on Shakespeare's play by the same name. At this point in the opera, all of the human characters have departed, headed back home to Italy. Ariel, the airy spirit of the island, who had been acting as a servant to Prospero, has been set free. Ariel sings her pleasure in an extraordinarily high vocal register to an untexted vocalese whose vowels are the vowels of her name, A, E, E, from Ariel. The music is an ecstatic celebration of freedom amid accompanying lines that are rapidly ascending and slowly descending. The vocal line alternates two intervals, 2 and 7. The interval 2 is always represented as two ascending semitones. The interval 7 is represented either by 7 semitones ascending or, more commonly, 5 semitones descending. Starting on E, go up 7 to B, then up 2 to C sharp, then up 7 to G sharp. Well, actually it's down 5, but that's more or less the same thing. Then up 2 to A sharp, then down 5, up 2 again, 4 more times. Then alternating up 7, up 2, down 5, up 2, and one final up 7. If you alternate intervals 7 and 2, you will end up back at your starting point after passing through 7 additional notes. The 8 notes of this combination cycle amount to an 8-note series for this melody. The melody states the series 2 times in order and begins a third statement. To put it another way, the melody moves around the cycle 2 complete times and then starts a third time. Start on E, then go around the cycle until you're back on E, repeat the same cycle again until you're back on E, then one more note, B, as though the cycle were starting for a third time. The 3-note segments of this cycle are all members of set class 025. In fact, the music alternates inversionally related members of that set class, first 025, then 035, and so on. What we have here is an RI chain where the last 2 notes in one link become the first 2 notes in the next link. The links in the chain are related by inversion around the 2 notes they share. So, E, B, C sharp overlaps with B, C sharp, G sharp, overlaps with C sharp, G sharp, B flat, and so on around the cycle. In addition to the regularities of interval and pitch, there is also a rhythmic pattern involved. Put crudely, the pattern is short, short, long, but usually the short notes last for 4/8 notes, and the long notes last for 8/8 notes. So we have a recurring pattern of 4 plus 4 plus 8. In the first part of the melody, this pattern lines up pretty well with the written bar lines, but in the second part of the melody, the pattern starts 1/4 note too late, and the melody is syncopated against the bar line. The pitch pattern and the rhythm pattern interact in complicated ways. The pitches repeat every 8 notes. The rhythm pattern, short, short, long, repeats every 3 notes. As a result, the two patterns are always out of phase with each other, at least in this passage. Short, short, long. 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 The accompaniment consists of 2 additional lines, a bass and an upper voice. Let's look first at the bass. In its pitches, the bass follows the same 7/2 compound cycle as the vocal line, but backwards or counterclockwise. It uses the same 8 pitches as the vocal melody, but presents them in the opposite order. All of the things we said about the vocal melody, about its intervals and its 3-note segments, are true of the bass also, but again in reverse order. The bass line moves relentlessly downward. But when it gets to a very low D flat, it bounces up 3 octaves and then resumes its descent. The bass descends around the cycle to note 3. Bounces up and repeats note 3, but 3 octaves higher. Descends around the cycle to note 3. Bounces up, this time moving ahead to note 2. Again, descends around the cycle to note 3, and bounces up to note 3 simultaneously. Descends once more around the cycle to note 3, bouncing up to repeat note 3 as it did the first time, then continuing into the next cycle. As for its rhythms, the bass uses a pattern of 2 shorts and a long, just like the vocal melody, but it does it twice as fast. Counting in 1/8 notes, the vocal melody goes 8-4-4, 8-4-4, while the bass goes 4-2-2, 4-2-2. And while the vocal melody was somewhat free in deploying this pattern, the bass is absolutely strict. As a result, the vocal melody and the bass are in a kind of diminution canon, with the bass moving through its pitches twice as fast as the vocal melody. In this passage, the vocal melody cycles around the circle twice in a clockwise direction, while the bass cycles around the circle 4 times in a counterclockwise direction. The inner voice is organized in a similar way. Its pitches move clockwise around the circle. In each trip around the circle, the pitches get higher and higher until they reach a very high C sharp, the third pitch on the clock face, when they jump down 3 octaves and start ascending again. It's just the opposite of the bass, which moved down to a low C sharp before jumping up. Because of the aligned rhythmic patterns in these two parts, the bass always reaches its low C sharp right around the moment when the inner voice reaches its high C sharp. The rhythm of the inner voice is also patterned. Counting in eighth notes, the pattern is 1-2-5. Like the rhythms of the vocal melody and bass, this is a 3-note rhythmic pattern. And thus, it does not align with the 8-note pitch pattern. Rhythmically, however, it repeats every 8 eighth notes, and thus always occurs in the same place within each measure, starting on beat 2. In that respect, it is like the bass rhythm, which also lasts for 8 eighth notes, and thus also occurs in the same position within each measure. Adding the introductory first measure into the mix, we have what appears to be a pretty complicated situation. 3 independent lines, each with its own pitch pattern and rhythm pattern. Within each line, the pitch and rhythm patterns do not align. And yet the overall impression of the music is of something relatively simple and harmonically motionless, as though one single thing is happening rather than lots of different things happening at the same time. I think there are two main reasons for that sense of simplicity and stasis. The first reason is that amid all this activity, only 8 notes are involved. We hear them in different orders, at different rates of speed, and in different registers, but there are still only 8 notes. These 8 notes comprise one of the 3 octatonic collections, that familiar scale of alternating semitones and whole tones. Here are the 8 notes of the octatonic collection, played first in cyclic or serial order. And then the same 8 notes played in scalar order starting on E, which is probably our best candidate for scale degree 1. The second reason has to do with the 3-note groups. As we noted earlier, every 3-note melodic segment is a member of set class 025, or its inversion 035. The same trichord type is formed again and again between the parts. I have used boxes to identify just a few of the many such instances. As a result, there is a high degree of harmonic uniformity in the passage, with all of the 3-note melodic segments and very many of the 3-note harmonies representing the same set type. This astonishingly high degree of melodic, rhythmic, and harmonic patterning creates a paradoxical effect. Because there are so many different and non-aligned patterns involved, no one pattern predominates. And indeed, the sense of patterning itself recedes, and we get an impression of a freely improvised swirl, a joyous cacophony that corresponds well with Ariel's state of mind.